Due to much greater demand than initially anticipated, the video that I was gonna make this week will be pushed a bit further down the line. We'll talk about patch culture another day. So, as I promised, let's go into detail about Kage.
His evisceration is imminent!
No, not the warrior, this Kage. Street Fighter V may have launched in a bad state, but by the end of its lifespan, it was pretty good. And in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty balanced. There were no characters that were considered unplayable, but there were still stronger characters and of course weaker characters, Kage being a prime example. But I'm not here to argue that he's the weakest character in the game. There isn't too much of a common consensus on that, and I'm not here to push a narrative like I did with Honda in 6. As the title suggests, I'm not saying that Kage is the weakest or worst character in the game in terms of competitive viability. I'm sure someone out there would be able to make a very strong argument for that claim. I'm here to make a much more subjective claim. I'm here to say that Kage is poorly designed. What do I mean by this? Hold on, because before that, I'm going to talk about why he's a weak character. Don't worry, everything will come together at the end. Let's talk about Kage. Narratively, Street Fighter V is a sequel to Street Fighter IV, where Ryu, main karate guy, was fighting with the Satsui no nephew, and trying not to succumb to its evilness, with it manifesting in him as the character Evil Ryu. But then he went through training or whatever and was able to shed its influence, with the resulting evil manifesting itself as Kage, a dark shadow of Ryu, the man who was once conflicted by the Satsui no nephew. He's the evilness from Ryu now that Ryu has no more evilness left, a direct progression from the previous entry's Evil Ryu. Disclaimer, this isn't a direct comparison between the two and why one is better than the other. I don't have a horse in this race, but I will bring up Evil Ryu later to make one specific point. So what are Kage's strengths? Every character has strengths and weaknesses, it's what makes them interesting, and it's what makes the genre so exciting. Kage is a spin-off of Ryu, and that means he has many of his moves, which means he has a Tatsu, a Dragon Punch, and it should mean he has a Fireball. All this to say, Kage doesn't not have a Fireball. His Hadouken is not a Fireball, but he has a Red Fireball, which can even be 2 or 3 hits, giving him an advantage in Fireball Wars, theoretically. So he does have something he can do from range. And in V-Trigger 2, he gets a pretty good Fireball. And the second point, Kage has really good damage. Once he gets in, he has good ways of blowing up your life bar, juggles, extensions, all the things that make sure that he plays like the evil character that he's meant to be. And to go with the damage, he has threatening mix-up potential. Side switch with his Air Tatsu, and his V-Trigger 1 giving him even more left-right mix. You've probably seen this before.
I'ma block this whack-ass mix-up.
He also has an overhead with his EX Stomp. High-low can also be threatening. And of course, just like Akuma, if everything lines up, he has V-Trigger 2 active, he can go for a Raging Demon. 1-frame startup, invincible, very scary. And he has a really threatening way of going into it with his Medium Stomp, the viewership test as explained here. Other than those things, he also has his Heavy Stomp that's plus on block, and he does have access to a Dive Kick. He also can get access to safe-ish, not really, reversals with his V-Trigger 1 teleport cancels. Also, his Light Tatsu doesn't whiff on crouching, and I think that's about it. So what makes the character so weak? What are the aspects of him that prevent him from competing? What is Kage's striking weakness? The Dark Hado may give you great strength, empowering your damage, but it also removes all of your limbs. Kage has some awful buttons. His medium punches are short, his crouch medium kick is short, his lights aren't awful, but he also doesn't have a standard heavy punch. None of these moves go very far, which means he has an awfully difficult time navigating the neutral. And those are just his cancelable normals. He has an alright stand medium kick, but you can only cancel it into V-Trigger and nothing else. Stand heavy kick seems alright, but it whiffs on crouching opponents, making it not very good. Not only does he not have good buttons to threaten in the neutral, his whiff punishes are also lacking, which leaves his game plan in neutral as poking with stand medium kick, fishing for a crush counter with forward heavy punch, crouch medium kick confirming if you can get there, and potentially V-Skill 1. Let's talk a bit more about V-Skill 1. One hit of upper body armor and can crush counter. Not too bad to be throwing out in the neutral, but has a crippling weakness to sweep. He also has below average life and stun. Kage has no buttons, and while he has very good walk speed, it just doesn't make up for the fact that he has absolutely no range and has no way of getting in. He's not aggressive because he wants to be, he's aggressive because he has no other choice. But there are other characters with short buttons, but they can get away with it because of this. The long range Fireball. And like I said earlier, Kage doesn't not have a Fireball, it's just that his Fireball is the worst Fireball in the game. No exaggeration, no joke, this is so bad. If you've played Street Fighter V, you would know that Urien is a good character. He had a Fireball. The Fireball was not very good because it had slow startup and recovery. If someone was focused, urine Fireballs were a good opportunity for a jump in. Kage's are 2 frames slower. Also longer input, not that big of a deal. Kage has the worst Fireball in the game. You could use it, but it is very risky. Not great as a zoning tool, especially in a game where anti-Fireball is so readily available. He does have an air Fireball, but that doesn't count. But once he activates V-Trigger too, he does get a pretty good Fireball. All he needs to complete his kit is a 3-bar V-Trigger, so one of his comeback tools fixes his incomplete kit. But it doesn't last forever, and is not one of the better V-Triggers regardless. Kage cannot do basically anything, and unlike Akuma, a character with many similar tools, he doesn't have something like Demon Flip to try to get in with. He doesn't have any reaction tests or resource dumps to skip neutral with. He does have a dive kick, but it's really not great. The frame data on it is just not enough. He also has his heavy stomp that is plus, but it doesn't go anywhere and it's reactable at 26 frame startup. You can even option select a 4 frame, making it more of a knowledge check than a reaction check. The character may hit real hard once he gets in, and with his V-Trigger he has quite threatening mix. But he has no effective way of actually getting to that range, and getting enough advantage to push that mix and that damage. And in the majority of cases in these games, that ends up mattering more than the upside once you do get in. I don't think anyone will argue with how scary Zangief is once he makes it into spinning piledriver range. But common consensus is that the character isn't very strong, because he also has no way of getting in. You can be as strong as you want once you're on offense, but if you can never get enough advantage to push offense, it's not as impactful. So that's what makes Kage weak. But like I said earlier, Kage isn't the worst character. Maybe. He's the worst designed. Characters aren't designed in a vacuum. Each character has to be designed with every other character in mind. Just like how we need to rate characters, what really matters is how each character compares to each other character. You may have big damage, but it doesn't matter if everyone else has more damage than you. It's all relative. And this is especially true when it comes to making characters that are already spin-offs of existing ones. They need to be different enough from their inspiration in order to justify themselves being an entirely different character, to justify taking up another precious character slot. Not every game can afford to fill the roster with reskins and call them Echo Fighters. And if Ken was just a Ryu reskin for decades, I don't think he would be nearly as beloved. These two characters are similar, but they clearly have enough differences to have distinct playstyles. And in Street Fighter 4, that's what the idea of Evil Ryu was. He has more damage, but in return he sacrifices his neutral game, which makes him distinct enough from Ryu to not only make him a successful character, but a beloved one. And because Kage is a narrative progression of Evil Ryu, I think it's a reasonable assumption that he will be designed with the same general template. Weaker neutral, which they certainly succeeded in. Ryu does have short limbs, but they are certainly better than Kage's. And also bigger damage and greater mix-up potential. And here's where I have a problem with Kage's design. Over the course of Street Fighter V's lifespan, Ryu was not historically a very strong character. He was certainly popular, but past Season 1, he did not make too many appearances in top 8s. And this is something that Capcom wanted to amend. Ryu is popular, and it does them good when Ryu is good and is represented in tournaments. It was especially damning that Daigo Umehara, the guy known for his Ryu, was playing Guile instead. So what could they do? Well, they went ahead and buffed Ryu. But even with that, he still wasn't topping anything. So what did they do? They kept buffing him over and over again until we moved on to Street Fighter 6, with Daigo playing Guile until the very end. But we aren't here to talk about how Capcom had no idea how to buff Ryu. Maybe a little bit. But every patch, they just kept on giving him more damage. No idea how to make him better, just keep pumping up his damage. They even continued this tradition in 6. Kinda like how they just kept on buffing Lariat for Alex. And after a while, Ryu started hitting really hard. Surprisingly hard. So much so that it ended up defeating the purpose of having Kage as a character. Why play a character with no limbs that can hit hard when you can play someone with limbs, a good fireball, with just as much damage? Ryu hits hard, so why go through all this trouble when you get practically the same thing with much less effort? Kage became redundant. If you wanted the damage, keep playing Ryu, and if you wanted the Akuma tools, just play Akuma. His buttons were still better, and he had even better walk speed. I won't say that there was no distinguishing aspects of Kage, but I would argue that meter-dependent mix-ups aren't enough to give the character enough of an identity. Kage is redundant, not due to his own fault, but due to how Ryu overshadows him. And that's really what I think matters the most. Does this character have their own identity? And for all the other bad characters in the game, I think you can make a solid argument. Maybe that identity got shifted because they were once overtuned, but they still have something that is uniquely theirs. But Kage doesn't, which is why I think he's the worst designed character in the game. Lack of insight, lack of foresight, and no idea how to buff Ryu. But narratively speaking, this is pretty fitting. Kage was the shadow of Ryu, the dark power discarded from him after he had moved past the temptation. And much like how the Dark Hado was shut off, no longer of use to Ryu, Kage was quietly rendered unnecessary in the roster. It's ironic. Ryu moved past the Dark Hado, and it seems like Capcom did just the same.